Good morning everyone, and welcome to day 2 of Ecosperity conference. My name is Carmen Nuzzo. I'm the Executive Director of the Transition Pathway Initiative Centre based at the London School of Economics, and we are the academic partner of the TPI, an asset owner-led initiative supported by asset managers, which is going from strength to strength. The theme of this year, let me see if this works. Does it work? Okay, there we go. Perfect. Sorry. So the theme of this year's Ecosperity conference is Asia's race towards 2030, all systems go. And this can certainly not be a marathon. It's got to be a sprint because time is ticking. So the net zero challenge comes with several challenges depending on the entity that faces them, and whether they are, for example, a company, a financial institution, a sovereign, or a local government. But it also, when it comes to companies, depends on the sector in which a company is operating. For example, if it's an oil and gas company, or, sorry, this is going not very fast. There we go. Or if it's a company operating in the shipping sector, or if it's a company where a technology already exists to reduce carbon emissions, like, for example, in the wind power sector or in the auto sector. But all these entities face the same, need to face when assessing these challenges, the same approach. One, a forward-looking approach. This is not about a static measuring of past emissions. It's about planning, it's about decision-making, it's about the actions that are taken today to shape the future of tomorrow. And it really requires a proactive approach to adaptation and risk mitigation. And although all these entities face different challenges, they all have one end goal, one direction. They need to get to the same finish line, but they can get there through multiple trajectories and multiple pathways depending on the policy options that each entity chooses. So at the London School of Economics, we have devised frameworks to assess different types of entities in the progress that they're making to the low carbon emissions. And we do that by rigorous monitoring of various types of entities, be them banks or sovereigns or corporates. We develop transparent and very detailed methodologies to do that. These methodologies benefit from the independence of the London School of Economics and its academic rigor and expertise. And importantly, they're all open access and based on publicly available information because we want to enhance transparency and accountability. And as I said earlier, we are the academic partner of TPI because all the resources that we produce have to be investment decision useful. They are informed by the input of investors. We get feedback from them, and we developed really to help them to allocate the capital where it's most needed. So, how do we do this? There is not much time to cover all the frameworks that we've produced, but I'll focus in the next 10 minutes on how we assess companies. We do this based on 2 pillars. One, it's called carbon performance, whereby we look at the track record of companies' emission intensities, and we also project the future trajectories of their emissions based on the net zero targets that these companies set. When the TPI was founded back in 2017, not many companies were setting net zero targets, and investors didn't have really a way to assess whether these targets were ambitious enough, and more importantly, if they were aligned with the Paris Agreement goals. So we developed sectoral benchmarks across different scenarios, which was the 3 different shaded areas that you see here on the screen. Each different blue color represents a scenario that is either compatible with the nationally determined contributions, the national pledges, or a below 2-degree scenario or 1.5-degree scenario. And we assess the degree of alignment of these past and future trajectories of each company's emission intensity based on each of them. And we do develop sectoral-specific methodologies across 4 industry clusters that you see here on the screen. At the moment, we have 12 specific sector benchmarks, and I would like to draw your attention to the latest one that we published last month on the coal mining sector, which is quite relevant for the Asian region. This is the only methodology where we use absolute emissions and not emission intensities, because to get to net zero, really, coal mining plants need to be wound down over time. But as you can see from the list, these are highly relevant sectors for the Asian region because they are mostly hard-to-abate sectors. The second dimension that we look at when we assess companies, it's called management quality. Here what we do is we look at the level of governance, if you will, the processes that companies put in place to reach these net zero targets. Effectively, they are an input measure, if you will. So what we do, we score companies here across 6 levels, ranging from level 0, if a company is completely unaware of climate-related risks and opportunities. Luckily, we don't have that many in the TPI universe that we currently cover. Then a company would score level 1 if it's beginning to raise awareness, to have awareness around climate-related risks and opportunities. It would score level 3 if it's at the stage of integrating climate considerations in its operational decision-making, all the way to level 4 or 5, designating a company that is either integrating climate in its strategic assessments or it's at an advanced level of actually transition planning and implementation. And how do we do that? We assess 23 indicators. I would like you not to focus on the small print that you see on the screen. It's just to give you a sense of the type of metrics that we look for. For instance, we look at whether a company has published a policy, whether a company has a board who is in charge, a board member who is in charge of the implementation of climate policy, if a company has disclosed scope 1 or scope 2 emissions, or even scope 3 if relevant, all the way to the level 5 that you see on the right-hand side of the screen, which is the newest one that we introduced more recently to look for metrics that give us an indication of whether a company implementation plan is actually credible. So let's focus now on the results that are relevant for this region of the world, in Asia. So this is the TPI overall company universe. We assess 2,000 companies, and we will continue, subject to funding, to increase the universe that we assess over time. As you can see, the largest share of this universe is in the Asian region, followed by North America and Europe. And in Asia, in particular, there is a highly preponderance of Chinese companies, but there are also other regions that are growing in importance. And this increase in the Asian company universe has really been triggered by the huge expansion that we experienced last year, going from 1,000 companies to 2,000 companies. And we expect this to continue going forward, meaning that this region will become strategically important for the TPI. So here, I just want to give you a sense of the type of analysis and results that we do based on the assessments that we conduct. This slide here shows the degree of carbon performance alignment in 4 main regions, where we see a high degree of alignment to the 3 Paris goal scenarios benchmarks that I told you earlier. So the segments that you see in green, yellow, and red are the ones that show that more than 50% in these regions of the world have companies that align with the Paris goal scenarios, but in 2050, so not near term, not medium term, over the long term. The picture is different when we come to China or other Asian countries, or even in North America and in Africa. This is perhaps not surprising given the high preponderance of hard-to-abate sectors in this region. But it's important not to look only at the long term. So here I've chosen the example of an Indian company, Tata Steel, to show that this company has a target which is actually aligned with a 1.5 degree scenario in 2045, so even earlier than most companies set long-term targets for. But if you look at its track record, not only is it diverging from the mean average, which you see in the red line here, but also to get to that target that is aligned with the most stringent of the Paris goal scenarios, it will require a pace of contraction that it actually not looks credible. And these are the results that, by region of the management quality. Remember the ladder that I showed you earlier? So as you can see, in different regions of the world, most companies, with a few exceptions, actually score 3, which means it's a level bar, is a central bar that you see here on the screen. It means that they're at a stage of integrating climate risks and considerations in operational decision making. But we see very few companies at level 4 or level 5. There are more in Europe than in others, perhaps not surprisingly given the regulatory impetus that we've seen in the last few years in Europe. What the analysis really shows is that even over time, the level of ambition of these companies has increased. The action is still lagging, and we don't see evidence of implementation. So very quickly, I wanted to show you how it's important not only to focus on regional averages, but also go down in the details. So here at the top of this slide, you see that actually, on average, Asia overall scores level 3, very similarly to the TPI universe, but it has a higher number of companies at level 1 or level 2. And if you look even deeper by country, there are huge differences. For example, we see a much higher average of a much higher number of companies at level 4 and 5 in South Korea, and to a lesser extent also in Japan, relative to the overall TPI universe, with further differences in other countries, and China still lagging. The problem in China is also lack of disclosure, so we cannot assess many of the companies that are in our universe. So let me conclude very quickly. As I said earlier, the challenges to go to net zero are really dependent on the entity that we assess, on the sector in which it operates, but location and geography matters. And location and geographies can be influenced by regulatory requirements, by the industry mix of a given economy, by the level of resources that is available, also by stakeholder pressure and different corporate norms. And so what we really need to fully assess any type of entity is a fully integrated model. Companies cannot be assessed in isolation. They have to be assessed in the context in which they operate. For that, we need to have information about the policies that sovereigns are putting in place. And also, we need to have information about the sources of funding that they're getting, including the funding that they get from banks, not just from the capital markets. So in order to do that, we went beyond pure assessment of companies at the TPI. And in 2023, we also developed a framework to assess sovereigns. I cannot go into details today, but the logic is similar, except that for sovereigns, we've also added a third dimension. Not only do we look at carbon performance and the policies that sovereigns put in place, but also how sovereigns are costing these measures. At the moment, we assess 70 countries. The map here shows which ones are the ones I've already analyzed. But by the end of this year, we will continue to expand the coverage further. And over the next couple of years, we plan to assess all the major countries that are in sovereign government bond indices. And in addition to this, we also assess now banks as of 2023. Last year, we assessed 38 banks, 26 of the international major banks, and 12 with regional banks in the US as a one-off exercise that we conducted. So we're in a very privileged position at the moment because we're beginning to connect dots. And so by overlaying the information that we're getting from the sovereign analysis over to the sectoral corporate analysis that we conduct, we can actually allow for a better, more nuanced assessments of corporate efforts on climate action. So I want to leave you with a call for action. What can you do? Well, first of all, let me go with you very quickly through the next steps of the TPI. As I mentioned earlier, we continue to expand the coverage. By the end of this year, we expect to cover 4,000 companies, 35 banks, 36 banks, and 80 countries. We also will focus more on transition planning. We're developing sector-specific methodologies that go beyond target alignment assessment. They really focus on action and implementation. And these are developed for the first time, bearing in mind AI tools that we're testing. And last but not least, we're developing a regional program. We already have regional benchmarks in the electricity sector, but we plan to do more perhaps in steel and in cement, where the data allow us to do so. But in addition to that, we're thinking about developing a regulatory risk measure that can give you a sense of what are the policies that are influencing corporate practices, as well as inevitably covering more emerging markets as our universe continues to expand. So use these resources. As I said, they're open access, they're free to download unless you use them for commercial purposes. These are examples of how investors can use the resources. Many use them for risk assessment or for portfolio alignment. Importantly, what we want them to be used for is for engagement. We really want to nurture that dialogue and not deprive companies, especially in the hard-to-abate sectors, for much needed capital to transform and bring the net zero transition forward. We also have seen usage for product development. For example, FTSE Russell, which is our data partner, produces a climate index series. And in Europe in particular, investors also use them for reporting and compliance, as well as a new development that we've seen is to use positive screening as opposed to negative screening when limiting the investable universe. So, if you're an investor in the room, please join the TPI initiative. It's growing in numbers, as you can see here on the screen. At the moment, we have over 150 investors that support us. They manage collectively $80 trillion. These figures are based on self-reported figures, so take them with a pinch of salt, but they are a large number. Here on the screen, you see some of the logos that they represent them. You can probably recognize large asset owners, smaller ones, but also many prominent asset managers. We're not that present in Asia yet, and we hope that we can rectify this in the future because we need more support in this area. And finally, we produce lots of insights and research. I'd like you to take a look at our flagship reports that we produce for all the entities that we assess at the moment. They're called State of Transition, and they're available on our website. And let me leave you with this thought. We work very closely with investors. We know that capital is needed not just from governments and public sources, but also from the private sector to fund the net zero transition. Finance alone cannot solve this problem, but without finance, we will not get to net zero either. So the TPI's resources and data are there to be used to help you to stay the course and really to allocate capital where it's most needed at this point in time. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to address any question during the break and the breakfast. The chair of the TPI Ltd board is also here, David Russell, if you can wave your hand. So we're both available for any question that you may have. Enjoy the rest of the conference and have a fruitful day. Thank you.